am so happy to be here at my first ever color-coordinated conference. This is a milestone for me. Oh, thank you to all the hard, amazing work that all of the conference organizers, Jimmy and Nishige and the entire board have done in pulling this together. It's a really special day so far, and I'm glad to be part of it. And so today we are going to be talking about playing the long game for coaches. As Lubna was kind enough to mention, my most recent book, which came out last fall, it was called The Long Game. The subtitle is How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And I think, these days that's something that is useful for everyone. The push of society in general is toward the short term. But the truth is, this is also something that is especially important for us as coaches, because something that I discovered early on in building my practice, and maybe you have too, although who knows, maybe you did it better than I did, but it takes a while. And we don't necessarily want it to, and there are certainly things we can do to get better and smarter at building our practice. And that is why you are a member of organizations like this one. That it is why you read and learn and do professional development, because we all want to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not making the same mistakes over and over again. That is true. There are absolutely things that we can do to be better. But it's also true that some things just inherently take a while to develop. And so the question of how do you thread that needle? How do you straddle the line between making things happen and being patient where you have to, because some things just take a while to percolate? This is the question that we need to answer. And I think it kind of does come down to a lot of long-term versus short-term considerations. How much of your time should you be spending on, sales, quote unquote, getting new clients, getting out there, talking to people, being in the marketplace, versus marketing, which is, creating content, building a platform, all the important things that you need to do that will yield results, but probably not tomorrow. So thinking that through as you're developing your business and your practice as a coach is really important. And it's something that I have done personally, and it's been very much on my mind in writing, and then over the past year talking about the long game. So a big part of all of this, every single one of you in this room, I have no doubt whatsoever that you are great at what you do. You became a coach. People don't become a coach because, they're mercenary assholes, right? That's just generally not a thing. You became a coach because you want to help people. You want to help people be their best selves. And you have skills and competencies. You have your own professional experience that you've built up over time. You have the coaching skills that you've cultivated and developed through training, through practice, through, your work in the field. That is amazing. I know that all of you are good and that all of you have something important to give. There is only one problem, which is, well, actually there's two, right? There's one. It's who knows about that question, because maybe this is the problem. Jimmy redid my slides, so I'm blaming him for everything. Here we go. There's a lot of coaches, and it is really important to recognize the people in this room. They are not your competitors. No one actually is your competitor, right? It's usually not the case that people who are evaluating coaches, literally have, here's my list of 10 coaches, let me pick, right? Usually the problem, if someone doesn't hire you, is they just put it off. They just say, I don't really need a coach, or I'll just read some books, or it'll take care of itself. All these things that, and I know is just not accurate. When people keep doing the same things, they keep getting the same results. We know that. But this is not a world where we are in competition with other people. And so this is important to recognize the people in this room are your collaborators. They're your cheerleaders. They're the people who can help make you better. But it is also true that in a world where there are, a lot of coaches in general, sometimes to the consumer, as it were, the person who is getting a coach, it can be a little confusing because they don't necessarily know why they should pick you. Not necessarily against someone else, but what is the compelling reason? What's the value proposition? What do you do differently? Why are you special? When I started my business, which was in 2006, people would ask me these questions, and frankly, these are not crazy questions, right? These are pretty innocent questions. Oh, what kind of people do you work with? Oh, well, how do you help them? What are you best at? What would you say your sweet spot is? And every time people ask me these questions, I wanted to punch them. I'm like, I don't know, you tell me. It feels very offensive and very confronting sometimes as you are figuring all this out to have to answer these questions for other people. This is not necessarily the easiest thing to ascertain. And sometimes you have to ascertain it through practice, through trial and error, just through time, right? But it becomes a chicken or egg situation because it can be a little hard to get the clients if you can't articulate who you want as your clients or who you are best at serving, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we find our way around this? Well, I essentially spent a lot of time thinking it over. I didn't have a lot of role models. I didn't actually know any coaches. I did not have the benefit of being part of a community like this. And so I really think it's fantastic that you guys are all here today learning from each other and investing your time in professional development, because it really does make things faster, easier, better when we can do that. I did a lot of banging my head against the wall, and I did a lot of just experimenting and trial and error to figure it out. But I knew I had to, because it very quickly became apparent to me that I needed to solve this problem or I would go out of business. Now, the good news for me, sometimes you have people who, have left like very lucrative corporate jobs and then they become a coach and they're like, oh my God, how do I make, the $300,000 that I used to make? I had, I guess you could say it was a good problem that I had been working for a nonprofit. So I was like, you know what? If I get one client, I am pretty sure I'll make more money than that. So that was encouraging, but, nonetheless, my 3-year business plan, I can articulate it for you. It was very detailed. Year 1, don't go bankrupt. Year 2, make as much as I made in my highly lucrative job as a bicycling nonprofit executive director. And number 3, by year 3, I wanted to crack 6 figures. That was my plan. I was going to march to do that. And the good news is that by hustling, not crazy Gary Vaynerchuk hustle, but nonetheless, by doing all the things, I was able to get there, thankfully, even faster than anticipated. But I don't feel like I necessarily did it in the most efficient way possible, right? I was literally just trying all the things and then seeing what worked and doubling down on that. But I became very committed to the idea of trying to help make things simpler for other people, because I am not a fan of hoarding information. That's how we get a system, which, frankly has been the system that has governed most of society for all time, right? Where it's just a set group of people who know all the things and have all the information, and they give it to their friend, to their college classmate, to their brother-in-law, to, the other person in Skull and Bones, and that's about it, right? I would much rather live in a world where the best ideas win, not just the people who happen to have connections to other people who are already in. And so I think it's really important to try to democratize information and to share what we know. And so I have spent the past, decade plus really trying to understand the necessary components. What is it that is required that enables us to break through? Because, we're all very well aware of this. I'm sure you know plenty of people who are fantastic at what they do, right? The artist that you look at their work and you're like, wow, that should be in a museum. That should be at the Whitney. And meanwhile, it's, at the Java Hut on the walls, right? What's the difference between the one that's selling for $200 at the Java Hut and the one that's selling for $200,000 at the Whitney? Not necessarily that much in terms of quality, but there's a lot in terms of marketing and positioning and packaging. And I think the same is true in coaching. There are some fields that are very easy to evaluate quality. Ours is not one of them. It's actually pretty hard, unless you have directly been coached by someone, to know how good of a coach they are. And so, for better or for worse, we have to concern ourselves with signaling and branding, because we need to find a way to tell people, to convey to people that we are good at what we do. Otherwise, they won't know. I mean, again, the people who you have coached will know, but it's not like any of you has coached 100,000 people. It's not enough to create the virality we need, right? 10 people, telling another 10 people is fantastic. It is really good incremental growth. But if you want exponential growth, if you want to, really be able to make a bigger impact, or work with more senior leaders, or to raise your fees to the level that they deserve to be at, or to be able to travel in the circles that you want to not have to worry about business development, but instead to be able to have people come to you unsolicited, which I think is probably the goal for most of us, you need to find a different way. And some people get a little annoyed, I think, or offended by the idea that we have to put thought into this. That, why do I have to do that, right? Why shouldn't my reputation speak for itself? And I get it. I totally get it. But also, dude, it's what we signed up for. It may actually sound humble to say, oh, I don't worry about that. I just worry about doing good work. I want to actually challenge you. In some ways, that's a form of arrogance, because it's saying, you know what, everyone else has to do the work of marketing themselves. I shouldn't have to do that work. It should come to me because I'm so good. I would love to live in a world where all this is sorted out for itself, where just people know. But people are busy, and people are stretched thin. And they just don't have the time to really deeply evaluate this. Even if they did, again, really hard to know, for any of us, how good you are unless you have worked with someone directly. And so it's just not probable. It's just not plausible. We need to be willing to do the work. If you are serious about making an impact, if you are serious about building the kind of practice, robust practice, where people are lining up, they're coming to you, they're saying, can I please work with you? We need to be willing to do the work of thinking through the marketing and the positioning. Now, that doesn't mean, however, to be clear, that you have to do a bunch of stuff that you hate, right? I'm not saying, oh, everybody has to have a podcast, or oh, everybody has to have a blog, or everybody has to be on Twitter. No, you don't. There's a million things you can do, but we have to do something, and we have to be thoughtful about how we put out that beacon. How do you make yourself findable to other people? How do you make yourself findable to the right people? That is the question. And so, one of the things that I have, really thought about, and this is a theme in the long game that I talk about, is making sure that we are actually pursuing the right goals. And what I mean by right goals, specifically, are we pursuing a pathway that will get us to the destination that we want? That's the question, right? Nobody wants to, get to the end of the line of all the hard work and all the effort and to realize, oh, as they say, the ladder was against the wrong wall. I want all of us to be in a place where the hard work and the sweat and the effort that we're putting in is going to the destination that we want to be at. And being able to help reach the impact, reach the people that we want to reach. And so being thoughtful upfront about what that looks like is one of the most important questions that we can tackle. So, I'm also, I wrote this book. Incidentally, the book is where there's going to be a book signing afterwards. So I'll just let you know, at 2, I'll be out in the hallway. You can get a book. And we can talk, and that is fantastic. There's also a free self-assessment I will just mention. It's a strategic thinking self-assessment. Any of you guys can download it for free at dorieclark.com/thelonggame. I'm often asked by the people that I work with, because I run an online community with a lot of coaches and consultants and things like that. And one of the first things that a lot of people are curious about is how long it actually really takes to become a recognized expert in your field. And in some ways, this is a question that, you might want to say, well, it varies, it depends. You might want to sort of wiggle and say there's not really an answer and it varies for every person. That is all true. But I'll also say, people want a freaking answer, right? And so I'll give you one. 2 to 5 years. That's how long it actually takes. And let me explain what I mean by that. There's over 700 people that have been through my program. So I've actually managed to have a fairly extensive, both in terms of its breadth and longitudinally, because I've been doing this for about 6 years. And so I have gotten to see both in my own experience and firsthand with hundreds of people what this process looks like. I will tell you that in my experience, the first 2 to 3 years can be very humbling because you have to be really consistent in putting yourself out there. And during that time, for those first 2 to 3 years, almost no one will pay attention. And this can be incredibly demoralizing. As you can imagine, you're like, why am I doing this? Why? And this is the place, this is not coincidental. Most people quit. But something really interesting happens. And this is why one of the things that I talk about in the long game is that a willingness to play the long game is actually in many ways a test of courage. It is a test of character. Because the truth is, if you are the person who does not quit, if you are the person who is willing to endure the ego challenge of doing a thing and feeling like no one cares and why am I doing this and I'm just sending it out into ether. If you are willing to push past it, something really interesting happens. You start the marathon and you think, oh, how could I ever win this? There's 10,000 people running this marathon. Guess what? You get to mile 13, the 10,000 has become 1,000. And you get to mile 21, and the 1,000 has become 300. And all of a sudden, your chances of success become enormously better because the field has thinned itself. Now, of course, you have to be good, yes, but sheer persistence, the willingness to go past that is actually oftentimes the ingredient that separates the people who are equally good. So year 2, year 3, it's like, why am I doing this, right? You're in the middle of a dark tunnel. And you're like, how long is this freaking tunnel? But by year 5, something interesting starts to happen because by that time, you have actually put a competitive moat between yourself and everyone else. You have been creating content or doing your things for so long, people start to know your name. You start to have way more contacts, way more connections. Opportunities start coming to you. And it takes a while. It takes that investment, but it becomes incredibly powerful. So let's dive in a little bit more to this process. So in becoming a recognized expert, and I'm just gonna forgive the cell phone. There's not a clock, so I'm just periodically gonna check just to make sure we're on track for everything. But what I've come to discover over the years is that there are 3 key components to becoming a recognized expert. These are pieces that work together, right? This becomes kind of a flywheel, that if you do these things, they end up reinforcing each other and helping to create your positioning in the marketplace. So the first one is, so actually all of them here, it really likes to sort of take its time in loading. But it's 3 things: content creation, social proof, and your network. And I will explain each of these in depth, right? So content creation, I am very deliberately using this term. This is a sort of medium agnostic term. I don't really care whether you are writing versus speaking versus having a video program versus having a podcast, whatever. It's all cool. The point, it doesn't necessarily matter how you do it, but the point that matters is that you need to be sharing your ideas publicly. I know earlier today, Ebony was talking about the importance of creating intellectual property. This is it. You need to give people who do not know you already a way to discover you. You need to put the light out in the lighthouse so they can come to you. Otherwise, your business grows because if I coached Brian, Brian says, oh, Dorie's amazing. And, he'll tell Galia, but, Brian, if I'm lucky, Brian, maybe is some kind of, maybe he's an Instagram influencer. But, most of our people that we coach, they might tell 1 or 2 friends. They're not going to tell 2,000 friends. We need to find a way so that people who haven't heard of us, who don't know our friends, can find us. And content is the path to do it. There's a lot of possibilities, and you can find the one that works for you. You can write for high-profile publications. Now, does this take effort? Of course it does. This is a woman who's a client of mine. Jennifer, she got this into the Harvard Business Review. There's what they call a ladder strategy, right? Or if you have not written at all, are you going to write tomorrow for HBR? Probably not. You probably need to work your way up in terms of the publications you do. But literally tomorrow, every single one of you could publish an article on Medium, on Thrive Global, on LinkedIn. These are all open publications. You can start doing that. Build up a track record, get comfortable in your voice, and then you can start pitching higher profile publications. Also, there's speaking, of course. There's a lot of great opportunities, whether it's, getting more involved in ICF. That's fantastic. You could offer to be, speaking, doing client lunch and learns. You could organize your own events. There's, a million organizations that are looking for content for webinars or, now that things are opening up more, things in person. But if you're comfortable speaking, that's a fantastic way, of course, to demonstrate your expertise. Having a podcast is great. This is another gentleman, Robbie, that I've worked with. He, you can see here, at this point, he had done about 160 podcast interviews. He's up even more now. I think it's close to 300 that he's done. The interesting thing about something like podcasting or having a show is that it doesn't just kill the content bird. There's another bird that suffers in this as well, and that is the networking bird. Because every single one of these people, it's somebody who he gets to spend an hour talking to. Guess what? There's a lot of people that might be hard for you to access. But if you say, hey, I have a show, and let's say they have a book that just came out, they are much more likely to say yes. And then you are expanding your network, which is quite powerful. So, there's a million possibilities of how to do it, but content creation is really essential. The second component is social proof. Let me explain this one. This is a little more foreign. But I think, as I explain it, it will make sense. The basic idea, this is a term used in psychology to refer to your credibility in the marketplace, right? How, at a glance, how credible are you perceived as being? And this is an important question because, again, people are busy, they're not paying attention, they're overloaded. How can you get people really fast to recognize that you are credible? Again, going back to signaling, how do we do it? I would argue that one of the fastest things we can do is to find a way to associate ourselves with well-known brands that are already trusted by the people that we're talking to. And there's a variety of different ways that you can do that. One, perhaps, is guest lecturing or teaching. As Ebony mentioned, I was sitting with her last night at dinner. She teaches for executive ed for FIU. That's a great credential that people can say, oh, well, I don't know anything about this woman, but oh, well, if she's legit enough to teach at FIU, she must be pretty good, right? And similarly, you don't even necessarily have to, to be a professor and teaching, a course or a program. You may well have connections with people who themselves are professors. You could say, hey, can I come in and do a guest lecture? Even that is something that is great. You can put that on your bio. She has guest lectured at universities. That's really good credibility. If you don't know anyone, you know what? You can cold call them. That is literally what I did 10 years ago when I said, you know what I need? I need more academic credentials. I started cold calling, or I guess more precisely, cold emailing universities. You reach out to the department head, you tell them who you are, you say, hey, I'd be willing to do this or this or this, and a certain percentage got back to me. Again, not everyone, clearly, but if you're willing to play the numbers game, you can often break in and do this. It's a great form of credibility. Also, of course, is media appearances. This is great. This woman, Laura, is in my program. She made it onto actually both Good Morning America and the Today Show. It's sort of like the ultimate here. Everybody loves that. But being in any form of media is really powerful. When I first started my business, I was living in Boston, and I would have it in my bio. Dorie has been featured in the Somerville Journal and Mass Inc. and eventually the Boston Globe, And now you continue to trade up, right? Now I do not mention the Somerville Journal in my bio anymore, but you work up to bigger and bigger publications. You build those relationships, you get featured, and of course, writing, for them, as we talked about earlier, right? A resource which some of you may be familiar with that I will mention, which is really handy. It is called HARO, H-A-R-O. It is Help a Reporter Out. And it is a free service. You can just Google it, H-A-R-O. And admittedly, there's a lot of email. You might want to have your separate file for it. But 3 times a day, it's essentially a matching service between reporters who are looking for sources and the people who are those sources. So 3 times a day, they send out an email. They say, oh, I'm looking for an expert in blah, blah, blah. And you read through it, and many of them are irrelevant, right? I'm looking for an expert in, trading, whatever, corn futures. Probably not you, I'm guessing. But some of them are relevant. And you can say, oh, and so it gives you a direct line to a reporter. You can write to them and say, oh, hey, I know about this. Here's my background. Here's my credentials. And I have had participants in my program use this to get quoted in Fortune, in Forbes, in USA Today, in US News and World Report. Some really prestigious things that can go straight into your bio. So it's a free resource that you can do. And then, of course, the other crucial piece of all of this, we mentioned 3 keys, right? Your content creation so that people know what your ideas are, your social proof so that people actually take you seriously, and then third is your network. Because your network is essential. You could have the best content in the world, you could have, really great credentials, but if you are basically living in a cave, it's not going to do you any good. You need amplification for your ideas. You need to, first of all, be exposed to new ideas, but you need people who can be your ambassadors and spread them in the world. There's a lot more rooms that you are not in as compared to rooms that you are in. And so it really helps that if, there's something going on, there's a gathering or whatever, and somebody says, oh, gosh, I really wish I had, a coach who knew how to blah, blah, blah. My friend's getting divorced. She really wants a divorce coach. Well, if you happen to know, someone who, they're a divorce coach, you can suggest that. You can be their ambassador. That's really powerful. Or if there's someone inside a corporation, they're like, gosh, I wonder who could keynote our blah, blah, blah conference. Well, wouldn't it be great if there was someone in that room who knew you and knew your expertise and said, oh, my friend would be perfect for that. You should hire him. So building a strong network is really important, and it's a necessary ingredient to all of this. And so, there's a million ways you can do it. Thankfully, we're, mostly kind of sort of past the chaos of the past couple of years, so we can gather in person for things like this now. We can have dinner gatherings and and lunches and one-on-ones. And of course, we can still do Zoom gatherings as well, which is great. But now is the time to make the effort, right? For most people, if we're thinking of it like a stock portfolio, most of us have been underweight on networking and connecting with people over the past 2 years, right? We haven't met that many new people. We haven't had opportunities like this. We've probably been focusing on other things. Now it's time to go overweight on that part of our portfolio. I would encourage you for the next 6 to 12 months, do more networking. This is the time when it is really useful to do that. And these are the pieces that kind of fit together. If you are committed and consistent in applying the 3 key pieces of building up your recognition as an expert, if you are willing to do the work around content creation, around developing social proof and building your network, that becomes a virtuous circle. That is what creates the conditions that enables us to take our practice and our impact to the place that we want. I'll mention one more free resource as well in case it's of interest. It is the Recognized Expert self-assessment. It's actually a scored self-assessment. So on these 3 metrics of content, of social proof, and network, you actually get a score. So you can actually see where you're stronger and where you're weaker, and therefore, where you might consider putting in more of your effort to get where you want to go. You can get it for free at dorieclark.com/toolkit, TOOLKIT, dorieclark.com/toolkit. And with that, it is just about time for our break. I will be out there. Books will be out there. ICF is selling the books for $20, and I'm glad to sign them, and I'm also just glad to say hi. Thank you all, and I am cheering you on in playing the long game. Thank you.